Hi, everyone. I figure let's just go around the group and introduce ourselves and our org that we're representing. So I'm Jeff Landau with the Contra Costa County Racial Justice Coalition. And I'm also a public defender in Contra Costa, but I'm sitting here as a member of the coalition. And this is a meeting of the Community Engagement and Funding Subcommittee of the Contra Costa County Oversight Body, Racial Justice Oversight Body. And let me hand it off to Ronell. Hi, Ronell.
Thank you, Jeff. Ronell Ellis, grateful to be here as usual. Just got back from being absent for a while. So just glad to be here. Health Right 360, Reentry Network over here in Antioch, serving Central to East County. And I'll pass it on over to Jill.
Perfect timing. My dog just stopped barking. This is Jill Ray with the Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson, and I'm going to toss it to Kiki.
Hello, Kiki Ferris, Contra Costa County Probation. Let's see, Patrice, is it Patrice though? No.
No, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Patrice Giller here from the Office of Reentry and Justice with the Probation Department. Good to see everybody. And I'll pass it to Melvin.
Afternoon, Melvin Russell with Probation. And looks like I'll pass it to Kimmy.
Hello, Kimmy Aseo with the Office of Reentry and Justice. And I'll pass it to Chris. You didn't go yet, right?
Excuse me, I did not. Good afternoon, everybody. Chris James, W. Haywood Burns Institute. And I think that leaves Stephanie.
Hi, I'm just a resident from District 2. I'm a retired teacher, and I'm just trying to learn more about the county government.
Glad you're here today, Stephanie.
There's no such thing as just a resident, right? We're really glad to have any and all members of the community in these spaces. So thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
100%. So we did our introductions and welcome. Anyone have announcements before we go to public comment? There will be opportunities. So let me move to public comment then. This would be anything that's not on our agenda today. And the agenda is available online. And so I'll invite if there's any public comment now. All right, don't feel pressure that this is the only opportunity. We'll have the chance later. So at each of the agenda items, there's the chance to comment, and given the size of the room, if you feel like there's something you wish to add moving forward, we'll have that chance. Okay, so let's move on to, and thanks Patrice for adding the agenda to our chat. That gives you the link that has our full agenda packet. We're going back to the record of actions from July 14th, 2022. We are, I'll just say out loud, operating as though the meeting in August had not happened due to the requirements that everyone be advised in the public as required. That I see that hand. So hopefully I'm not overstepping, and I'm saying that we're proceeding now. Let me hand the mic to Patrice, if I may.
No, you're doing fine. I just wanted to give folks a little context. During the last month's meeting, there was a bit of a faux pas there with the Zoom link. And so that essentially sort of restricted the public's ability to jump in on the meeting. And therefore, because of that, we needed to cancel that meeting. Now, mind you, because I'm the staff person that's listed on the agenda, and it just so happened I was off that day, I got a ton of calls and emails from the public, and unfortunately couldn't get to it as quickly as possible. So my apologies for that. So we are sort of doing a redo, if you will, of that meeting. And that's why you all will be voting on the record of action again, but for the first time.
Thanks, Patrice. Right. No worries. That's where we are. We're moving forward. And that's the important context that you just gave of kind of where we are, why would we be giving the record of action from July because of that context. So I'm inclined to reference to say this sailed through in August, but let's disregard that and just say I'm putting forward consideration of approving the record of actions from July 14th, our meeting, and you see that on page 4 of 20 on our agenda packet. Does anyone have any proposed changes, additions, otherwise, before we would take a motion to approve the record of actions from this July meeting? All right, not seeing any indication of there being proposed change. I'll ask if there is a motion to approve the record of actions as drafted in our agenda packet. I'll make that motion. Does anyone second the motion to approve the record of actions as we have it there? I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to review. Any question, any potential item to be clarified before?
I can second it, Jeff.
Thanks, Kiki. Okay. Any public comment on this motion to approve the record of actions from July? All right. Not seeing any further indication of public comment or discussion on the item, I think we can take this for a vote.
All right, Jeff,
Yes.
Kiki,
Yes.
and Renell.
Yes.
Thank you. Passed unanimously, sorry.
No worries. All right, thank you. So we're there.
Jeff, you're muted if you're talking to us.
Thank you, Jill. I was trying to, so thank you for the assist. Right, so here we are at our standing agenda item for JJCC updates, and where I would normally turn to Kiki and see if there's anything you would have to share with us about updates since our last meeting.
I do not, because as you probably know, we the community engagement and funding, no, that's this one, sorry, the PICE, the PICE subcommittee, it's hard for me to keep them all straight, has not been meeting. But I think generally there seems to be a consensus among all the subcommittees to kind of take a look at the scope of work, with now being a good time to see if new subcommittees will emerge with different sort of plans of action. So just want to throw that out there because I happened to listen in on data and services and they were doing the same thing. So I think that we'll see some change in direction if subcommittees continue with sort of different work plans.
Thanks, Kiki. Gives us a sense of where things are right now. Does anyone else have anything to add about where things are with JJCC and our interaction and collaboration with the work that's being done there? Okay. Well, thanks, Kiki, as always, for keeping us informed of the status of what's happening to make sure that we're informed as we're acting here. Okay. Patrice, please.
Yeah, I just thought of something. Actually, at the last JJCC full body meeting, and this might be relevant to any of the work you all might be discussing down at the Community Capacity Fund item. Probation, we recently entered into a partnership with the Antioch Community Foundation, where we will be utilizing some of our JJCPA funds. We'll be essentially using that foundation as a pass-through to provide mini grants to smaller CBOs that serve young people who are at risk of being engaged in the justice system or currently involved in the justice system, and with a particular focus on serving young people in the East County region. So the foundation will likely have an open grant cycle launched sometime in October, not April, in October, and we'll be outreaching to organizations throughout that region, or at least organizations serving that region, to take advantage of the opportunity. So we're really excited about this partnership, and we hope that this will be a model for us to do something similar for other smaller regional foundations in Central County as well as West County as well. But this is just sort of our initial toe in the pond, if you will. And the benefit of creating this sort of a partnership is that they're very well equipped to address any needs around capacity building for these organizations. And essentially we're providing the resources to help and expand the pool of services and programming for those areas. So happy to share more as it develops, because I'm involved in that process very closely, and just thought it would be a great model for CEEF in the event you all want to follow something similar.
Thanks, Patrice. I'm really glad you took that opportunity to let us know about it. It seems like it's a natural fit for our consideration of opportunities for the Community Capacity Fund and what we're trying to do there. So that's exciting. And I think hopefully it's something we can build on and also be aware of as we're trying to build the community capacity funds here, that we're not being redundant and we're doing something new that would be building on that. But that's sounds terrific. So I'm glad that that's coming up. Any other input, feedback on JJCC and our status before we move to the next item? And I'll also invite, as I'm asking that, any public comment on the standing agenda item for JJCC updates. Okay. I think that will lead us to move then to our quarterly RJOB debrief regarding sheriff oversight. Well, timing. Cheryl Suddeth, hi. Welcome to our meeting.
Hola.
We are at agenda item number 5, the quarterly RJOB debrief regarding sheriff oversight. And while it was not a meeting of the subcommittee, I can say that there was robust turnout of a gathering of people online in July, or rather August, on this item. And that at least my sense is that there was broad interest and concern about making sure that this stays on our work plan as part of the focus of what the community engagement and funding subcommittee is doing, along with other important items, but that's being responsive, I think, to what we've heard in public comment, not just last time at that non-formal meeting, but at previous meetings too. So I guess I'd serve that up as saying that we've heard from community, my sense is that this is a priority item, and that at present, the status is not, it seems indications, and I'm inviting others to comment on this after I give the introduction. It seems that at current, the status is not from the supervisors to have a community oversight body, but rather to have the sheriff report to the supervisors directly as to what's happening, rather than having an additional layer of community oversight between the sheriff's reporting and supervisors. And I'll welcome also, hi Marcus. We're at agenda item 5. Glad you're with us. Another member of our community engagement and funding subcommittee. Right, talking about sheriff oversight and where we stand with that relative to the status of the recommendation from the full RJOB to have a community oversight body as opposed to self-reporting, and the status of it being currently poised for or in the position of self-reporting as opposed to having community oversight. So I just wanted to bring that forward to the group and see everyone's thoughts on how we would proceed moving forward. And more specifically, how would we advance this as one of our work plan items, given where we are now? Jill, I see your hand, please.
Sorry, I'm not on the committee. I just thought I would add one more clarification to what was agreed upon in the agreement at the Board of Supervisors, since the legislation does make them the authority. They did go ahead and ask staff to prepare whatever they need to do to ensure that if they feel that the sheriff is not providing the information requested or is not providing all the information, that there can be an immediate inspector general appointed to resolve those issues. So just to add a little bit more to what was agreed upon at the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you, Jill. It's important that we have the full context, so I appreciate you adding that, so that we're aware of where things stand. Anyone's thoughts? And I'll just say, even if perhaps if we had expressed this last time and it seems like it's repeating, we sort of need to, so to speak, because last time's meeting does not exist for the purposes of the record of the work of the group. So I guess I'd say is, if you feel like it's important that we continue advocating for community oversight of the sheriff, I encourage you to speak briefly in favor of that, if so. And if you feel opposed to it, to speak also. But to make sure that we're capturing the sentiment of this group accurately. So one way or the other, if I suppose if folks have a sentiment of whether it's worth our continuing to pursue specifically community oversight as opposed to the reporting from the sheriff and the opportunity to request oversight in the event of there being concerns that the supervisors have about what's being reported. Right. Please, Jill.
One other piece of clarification. The Board of Supervisors have oversight over the sheriff. This, what was being called for was an advisory body to the Board of Supervisors to sort of do that function. So just clarify, they would be advisory to the Board of Supervisors, that they wouldn't actually technically have oversight over the sheriff.
Thank you, Jill.
I was gonna
Please,
say,
Ronell.
yeah, because the supervisors have oversight over the sheriff, but that's not really how they operate, correct? I mean, they're doing a self-reporting. So I don't know if the Board of Supervisors is enforcing anything or doing anything other than allowing the sheriff department to report. Am I wrong on that, or is my assessment accurate?
Jill, I see your hand, please.
Or do you want me to respond to that?
Please go ahead.
So this hasn't happened yet. It's a fairly new piece of legislation. And so other counties are doing various things. Some are doing nothing. So we looked at all the various counties. So what this does is the report was established. It was reviewed at the PPC. They took community input as well as the Board of Supervisors input on additional pieces of information they want reported on. These statistics are all verifiable. They're all, I think pretty much all of them are reported at various levels. So it's not, and it's information that he's providing directly to the Board of Supervisors on a regular basis. So if there's a suicide in the jail, they know that immediately. What this is doing is sort of making those reports transparent and automatic to the public rather than public having to ask for them. And so this quarterly report is new. It hasn't happened yet. It's information. They will have this report and it will be done at the Board of Supervisors meeting. So it will be reviewed publicly, allow for public comments and questions. And as time goes on, if there's more information the public is interested in knowing about, those can be added to the request for report. If they feel like there's a piece of this missing information, if they feel like he's holding back on information, that's where the implementation of an inspector general comes in, where they could then go in and have the authority to delve into the records deeper if there. So it gives that back. But at this point in time, the Board of Supervisors felt that Sheriff Livingston was pretty open with them and provided the information that they were requesting. And so they're just adding that transparent layer more automatically for the public. Did that answer your question, Ronell?
Yep, that did answer my question. Thank you, Jill, for that. I appreciate it.
Others' thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think it's important to point out that at last month's attempted meeting, there were, before we had to close it, there were a lot of members of the community who had either attended the recent Board of Supervisors meeting or the recent quarterly RJOB meeting, or, you know, potentially some folks who attended neither but wanted to be heard on the issue and felt that it was, you know, still important to them to have that Oversight Advisory Committee to the Board of Supervisors, and felt like, you know, there's specific concerns around that hadn't been appropriately addressed or spoken to, and certainly not sufficiently resolved. And I know that we did, again, have to cancel that meeting, and that meeting did not count because we had issues with the link, and so everyone was not able to attend, as Patrice laid out already, in a much more comprehensive way than I just did. But and it's, you know, it's unfortunate, of course, that happened, because there was a lot of intensity around it, and with time passing, although there was, you know, the effort to try to have a special meeting to capture those voices, you know, if you wait essentially a month, which we ended up having to do, then you can lose a lot of that intensity and a lot of that presence. But, you know, it's just important to note that there was significant attendance and discussion, and probably folks still in the queue waiting to be heard, when we did have to close the meeting.
Thanks for adding that context, Chris. And let me see, Stephanie, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I just want to, I just want to echo what Mr. James just said, because I did attend that meeting, and many of us we were calling and trying to get on, and I understand, and things like that happen. So I don't know. I think it's really important to set up another meeting and make it known so you could recapture the presence, the attention, and the energy, because there are a lot of people that feel very, very strongly about this. And I think they would want another opportunity to be heard. I mean, I know I do. I think having, however it's going to be, you know, it's self-reporting, is my understanding what was finally agreed upon. And so it doesn't sound like there would be yet an advisory of oversight to the supervisors. I know Ms. Ray just gave a lot of information. I'm sorry, some of it I don't know if I completely captured. I'm just a firm believer that I think there needs to be the opportunity for members of the community to have access to the information and to be able to go through some channel of asking questions, so that if somebody's told that a family member, you know, committed suicide while they were in jail, or came in with drugs in their system, and yet meanwhile they've never used drugs. I mean, all of that needs to be, there needs to be proper channels for that to be looked at. And unfortunately, AB 1608 did not make it out of the legislature, and by Gibson and Weber, and then I think Senator Pan also got involved. But that's the assembly bill to separate the duties of the sheriff and the coroner. So for somebody that lives in District 2, and it took over 1.5 years to get any kind of coroner's report on Tyrell Wilson that was shot in close range by a police officer that had already killed somebody and is in serving time for that. I mean, you know, many of us in this part of the county just feel, you know, really strongly about this. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak up.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let me invite others if they have comments, feedback on this. Let me take the minute as we're still inviting anyone if they have additional comment to see, for me to maybe just expand on what I think the significant differences between the supervisors receiving the information directly from the sheriff and having the opportunity to have Inspector General, as opposed to what had been recommended by our full RJOB at our quarterly meeting. And that was August 5th, 2021, and it should be attached here, attachment 2 at page 7. And you can see the language that the motion urges the Board of Supervisors to create a sheriff oversight board pursuant to Government Code Section 25303.7. So we were specific on that section, and as opposed to, and you can see further going down in the packet, this would be page 12 of 20, 25303.7. And that's a sheriff oversight board comprised of civilians to assist the Board of Supervisors with its duties. And continues further, but includes in there subpoena power that the civilian group would have. So it is true that ultimate oversight of the sheriff lies with the Board of Supervisors. This is the language of the law that's now been passed, which was questioned before of whether there was such authority, but now this law has passed and is in effect. So it gives the opportunity and not the obligation or not the requirement for the supervisors to pursue this, because the supervisors have the prerogative, as I see their legal opportunities, given my read of the statute. Supervisors could say, we're satisfied with having the sheriff report to us directly, and if there's anything that seems needing follow-up, we can have the Inspector General, as opposed to having this intermediary group, which is not ultimately overseeing the sheriff. But as I'm saying, there is a difference between the two, and it's not a, from my perspective, meaningless in between, in that there is the power to subpoena records, further information that would give information to the sheriff so that they could give information to the supervisors for them to make decisions moving forward. And there's always more work to be done, and any time when there's the attempt to oversee a agency as broad as the sheriff's office. So I think it's unrealistic to expect the supervisors to be able to devote so much energy and resources to overseeing all of the actions of the sheriff, as opposed to having a civilian group in between that can vet information, seek additional information through subpoena, and then provide it to the supervisors so that they're best informed to act. So that's my statement in favor of there being our continued pursuit of this, despite there being supervisors indicating their intention to continue to require, as the law demands, right? They're going to continue to require information from the sheriff, but that we can pursue more as this subcommittee and as the full RJOB based upon our specific vote for the civilian oversight as opposed to the alternative self-reporting. And I'll relinquish microphone, ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak further on this. Inviting public comment. I know we've received and appreciate, but just before, and Stephanie, I see you unmuted, please.
I guess I just want to see if there's anybody else first. I think I was the last to talk, so before I speak anymore.
I don't think you're preventing others, so please go ahead.
Okay, I guess I would just want to convey to the supervisors, because I sense that there's, they feel pressure. I sense several of them seem to be intimidated. And this has nothing to do with them as individuals or the present sheriff as an individual. This is about changing the structure for the future, for a long-term view. This is a view long after the present sheriff or any of the present supervisors are in office. The way that things stand now, the office as sheriff, as you said, Mr. Landau, it has broad oversight. It's I mean, I don't know, to me, it just seems like the office just has unbridled power and influence. It's not comfortable to me. In previous places I lived in places where there's just like a police department for that particular community. I'm from Los Angeles and I lived in LA for many years, but I never lived in a city where it was just the LA sheriff. I probably did, or maybe I did for a period of time and I didn't understand it. But it just seems to me that the office itself just has too much power, too much influence, authority. And, you know, the county has over 1 million people. It's a very diverse county with a large budget. I really think that there needs to be more of a balance. There needs to be more of a system of checks and balances. And I think that's really lacking right now. So it doesn't have necessarily so much to do with David Livingston or any of the supervisors. It's about doing some fine tuning to the government and the governance in our county and promoting more accountability. I mean, making it safer. I don't feel like it's really that safe. I feel like more vulnerable members of our community are targeted, and we need to have a check on that.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate you adding your comment. So we've heard from folks here, and as Chris was saying and others, this is to a certain extent recapture or reinforcement of information that was provided and feedback provided previously. So I guess I'd say, as we're looking at our time today and what we want to devote in resources, specifically with an eye to giving a chance to update on the Youth Advisory Council, my proposal is to keep this on the agenda, and that we'll note the feedback that we've had here, and we will continue to advocate as appropriate, informed by what we've heard. And there'll be the chance for interaction with staff to best prepare and how we can be responsive to what we're hearing and maintain the fidelity to our work plan and our recommendations, the mandate that we have. So unless there's further comment on this agenda item, I would propose that we move ahead in our agenda, and that would bring us to considering the model for community capacity fund. We've got time. I'm looking. I know that I said specifically I was hoping we'd get the chance for youth advisory councils. So that's just a time of, as a concept of time management, I suppose I'd propose to reserve, if we can, 30 minutes at the end for the Youth Advisory Council, which would give us 13 minutes now to talk about the Community Capacity Fund. And perhaps what I can say to serve this up is that we had some discussion, limited because much of it was focused on the sheriff oversight last time, but about where we stand with the Community Capacity Fund, and talking about the models that exist, reviewing what's happened here in Contra Costa County, as well as considering the information we received sometime back from Jewel Legacy Group about the efforts in Alameda County and project there. We've already talked about the two-tiered system and voted upon that as this group of having a smaller initial cohort that would receive funding and support and community in that sense. And also, thank you, Jill, for adding that Board of Supervisors item, and gives us further context to where things stand with supervisors on sheriff oversight. That, right, there would be that first phase of initial funding for a broader group, and then based upon what happens there, a smaller select group that would receive further technical assistance and funding. And all of this with an eye toward providing additional community resources for what exists and what is, and if it in its infancy, building in terms of resources as alternatives to versions from the traditional criminal justice system, so that we can in turn be reducing the racial disparities that we know exist here as well as everywhere, and believing that having those sorts of alternatives will result in reduction in the disparities. So a lot said by me in terms of just general introduction. I wonder if anyone in our group has further thoughts on where we stand with this project. I'll just briefly add that I know we've also considered the context of who can hold this work in terms of staff support, and that being a continuing question because it does require some assistance, some technical assistance beyond what we can expect from our subcommittee members to create the next step to get to a viable proposal for funding. And that said, I'll invite if anyone has any thoughts on where we stand with this project for our meeting today.
So I'll just say on this, I think this is one of those spaces where, not to bring this all the way back up or to relitigate it, per se, but I think this is one of those spaces where it makes sense potentially to have, a smaller working group sort of looking at this, because we do know that we're going to eventually need to, to have some other technical assistance provider help to sort of set this up, develop it, and sort of structure it in a way that's going to work. We even know of, an organization that has done similar work, I think, in the county, as well as, in Oakland, around this sort of issue or this sort of challenge or project. But what we need is the actual proposal, right? We've actually even submitted, formally, I think, a motion to the board to, provide technical assistance, or at least the funding to get technical assistance. And it's like, okay, but for what? Right. which is, I think, a legitimate question. Just means that there's got to be a concrete sort of proposal for what we're talking about. And that's where I think that program overview and those sorts of things come in, just to see like what sort of language is already developed in a similar vein, to take that and to develop language that is sort of modeled in the same way, but speaks directly to what this group is wanting to do with the Community Capacity Fund. And then once there is that sort of proposal, hopefully in addition to that proposal, the same sort of recommendation or the same sort of motion going back to the board to say, now that we've sort of ironed out what this is, how it should operate, who it's for, we're asking that, it be sort of taken out of our hands, not because we're running from the challenge, but because we recognize that we don't have the skill sets or expertise, as you laid out, Jeff, to actually build it out, right? And to staff it in a way that means everybody gets what they need in terms of the programming, the funding, how much funding does every group get, all of that sort of detail. And so but I do not think that's something, my point is overall, that I don't think that's something that would happen in these meetings per se. And that's with history, recent history being, sort of an indicator or a guide. No shade to any of us. We all work hard. I just don't know that this is the space where those documents really get developed in the way that they need to, so that they can move forward. And so I would recommend, if there are folks in this group who want to be involved with that, just meeting in a smaller group to really sort of hammer out some language that obviously comes back here for everyone to put eyes on, so that we actually are moving this forward, as opposed to kind of coming back and talking about it and not really making any concrete steps forward, and then coming back the next month and kind of repeating the same process.
Ronell, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, that really makes a lot of sense in terms of understanding what you're capable of. You don't want to be charged with doing something that you can't produce, right? So I agree with Chris. Now this is a conclusion, making sure that we, position ourselves to a way where we're assessing things properly and trying to move forward in a fashion where we're just being accountable, right? So I think that's important, so that we don't get lost and things get tied up in our hands when it should be out of our hands. So it makes sense to me.
Thanks for now. Sounds like we're on the same page from those who have given comment already, but let me invite others to give feedback on this. Basically, the gist being, let's regroup in a small working group to give kind of the detailed work that needs to happen between now and our next meeting, so that we have a little bit more firm proposal to give to everyone. Anyone have other thoughts on this before we would? I'll include here public comment, if there's any public comment that anyone wishes to give on this item.
Can I just ask a question, just a point of clarification? So we're talking about a smaller work group of this current group. And there's how many of you guys on this group? 4?
Yes.
So
I'd say yes, yeah.
So then you're saying that it would then be 2 of this group who's working on it. And the thing that I hear from other sort of committees that I've been on is folks are at their bandwidth. And I know we have chairs in other spaces who are looking to sort of step down from being chairs because of the additional work and stuff. And so I'm just curious as to this committee, because I know from probation standpoint, we can't commit to another committee because we're staffing all these other sort of committees. So that would then just leave Jeff, you, and Renell.
And Marcus, I don't know if you're intending to be staying with us.
Because it can't be.
I will be staying, but I'm not sure about sitting on a subcommittee to work on this item.
Yeah, fair. And Melvin, feel free to continue if there was something more you wanted to.
No, I was just saying, because then the subcommittee of the subcommittee, there can only be two members, right? Is there an issue if there's more than two, then it becomes sort of a quorum issue, or no?
I think that's right. And it would be, I think, supported by, informed by having usually the assistance of Chris and or folks from ORJ to kind of try to create a outline or something like that that would be brought to the bigger group. But and less formal than a subcommittee. I see Jill's hand.
Yeah, maybe I can just help,
Please.
Clarification. So in other advisory bodies, when there's been a piece of work that's been wanted to sort of to work on, they just create, a 2-person group just gets together, and then that way they can bounce it back and forth by email. You don't get into that Brown Act thing because the two people are just sharing the information. It doesn't have to be a sit down at a coffee shop. It could just be, hey, here's what I have, and then you add this, and then it comes back as an agendized item on this subcommittee's agenda. So it's not a formal subcommittee. I don't know how much involvement either Chris or the ORJ, other than to provide some, some language, they could be part of the email back and forth. So that's it's just a much looser. You don't have to worry about public comment and all the public. You could do it behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. And I would just add, so the initial sort of context for this, and Jeff, I apologize, we're going to bleed over into the 30 minutes that we reserved for agenda item number 7, was for subcommittees to meet on a less regular basis. This was the original thing that we sort of discussed briefly at the Our Job Quarterly, so that more of this kind of work could be done, because essentially the work that needs to be done on most of the agenda items that we're going to have every month happens not at the meeting. It happens at some point between the meeting, which means somebody already, needs to, on some level, meet in between, these monthly meetings, or do things in between these monthly meetings. And so just trying to, make sure that we're structured in a way that helps us to move forward. So even if these subcommittees meet every other month or every quarter, which I think was the original intention, and then these work groups have more time to sort of really do that work that Jill sort of described there, so that you come back and you actually have something to respond to. So, I mean, that could potentially be an option. I think another option could be just more preparation, participation in these meetings, like more willingness to actually get into the weeds of the details of the development of these things, versus sort of looking for report outs and maybe having something to say or not, based on what's being shared. Just wanted to make sure that this, because again, at any rate, right, if we continue to meet every month or not, whoever's going to be working directly on this item, even the Youth Advisory Council item, right, we have a small group of folks, some of whom are not necessarily on the body, but like work for RISE or work for the Burns Institute, in addition to members of the body working on that. So I think those things have to happen, and they happen in between meetings anyway. It's just saying, how many meetings do we want to come back to and say, well, we're still working on that. And hopefully next month we have something to show you. versus maybe, taking a little bit more time to do the work and to get into the weeds of that stuff, which is not necessarily appropriate for a public meeting, is not necessarily appropriate for report outs or for people to really sort of listen to. It's like it's more of a space where everybody needs to be contributing and collaborating together, and getting into the details, which get messy and are not necessarily the sound bites that I think we're conditioned to kind of expect a lot of times when it comes to this. So just bringing back that option, because it seems like here, again, a lot of this work on this particular item, as well as, even the Youth Advisory Council, it seems like a lot of the work would happen in between this group meeting. And then we come back and say, here's what we've got. How do you feel about it? What do you think? What should we change? And that's fine. I think that's a great use of this meeting, is just that, if we're doing it every month, there may not necessarily be a substantive update every month until, those meetings that happen in between get done or move forward in a substantive enough way to yield that.
Thanks, Chris. Very much appreciate what you're saying. I'll give my brief response to that and invite still others to give their comments. That, right, I think it's important that we have a clear-eyed awareness or recognition of our bandwidth, our capacity to do the work, because there is a certain point at which, if you meet too frequently, that it's counterproductive, that really all you're reporting back on is that we need more time. And I think there's also, on the other end of the spectrum, and I don't think we're there, the other end of the spectrum is that, like, important things happen and then they become old news by the time that you get back to the quarterly. And the steam is lost, despite the fact that it was really outrageous. And if we had had an intervening meeting, perhaps we would have addressed it. So that said, I think where we are right now, my sense is that we're too far on one end of the spectrum, that we are too often, given everyone else's commitments, myself included, to be able to have meaningful progress between monthly meetings of the subcommittee. Seems like it is too fast to clip, and that it would perhaps be appropriate to move back to every other month as a test to see where that goes. And if that seems like, we're still not getting it done, to go from there. I'm hesitant to move further than that from where we are because of the balancing of the spectrum, as I was saying. So, right, it would give that opportunity for continued work in between the meetings to address the reality of capacity that we have and not go too far in the other direction that we drift from progress. So, right, that's my initial thoughts response. What do others think? I think this is forming into a proposal, a suggestion. I don't know how it works procedurally. Maybe it's just left to the subcommittee to decide how we meet and how often. I can't recall how that fits with the bylaws, but the idea being that we would meet every other month as opposed to every month, to make sure that we're actually getting the work done that we need to, and that we're making best use of the subcommittee time.
I think at the quarterly RJOB, they left it up to each subcommittee to decide what their meeting schedule was. That's what they said when the data subcommittee went to them. And they said, you decide.
That makes sense. Thanks, Joe. So I suppose this is a good idea, bad idea? Anyone's thoughts on, from our group specifically about, because I think it probably, schedule-wise, first would impact the current subcommittee members, but also staff and others, community, in terms of what this would mean in terms of our productivity and all factors, accessibility.
So I have a thought, just based on kind of the way the conversation has gone and now us considering the meeting frequency, that it might be a good time to sort of refresh what is on our agenda, so to speak, like where the subcommittee is with the different work plans that were laid out, I'm sure many, many moons ago, even before my time. To then try to understand, because we are a small work group, to Melvin's point, where there's some limitations there, to then try to understand what's left to be done and what's realistic as far as what the meeting times or frequencies should look like. Because I think, if we're going to talk about meeting frequency, we really have to get clear on what are we meeting about, and what step are we on which projects and conversations. So maybe that's something that that we should discuss first and before figuring out the frequency.
Good point. Bringing us back to why are we doing what we're doing, so we make sure that we're acting with that in mind. My thoughts initially are that, key campaigns have been the Youth Advisory Council, the Community Capacity Fund. Sheriff Oversight has been a through line, even if it's not on our specific work plan. If you look back at our subcommittee meetings over time, it's been there, and it was one of the recommendations of the full RJOB, but those seem like the most kind of obvious pieces to me, as well as this being maybe more of an access point than the other subcommittees for someone to come up and join us in community and say, hey, there's something really screwed up that's going on here, or I had the bad experience with whatever loved one it may be, to share, because it's that community engagement and funding concept of, I think, if people are feeling like, where do I report what's happened here? There's something, someone had come to us before from CAB, I recall, and talking about concern of there being law enforcement may be involved in hate groups. How do we look into this, right? And this would be the sort of place, if someone had a concern like that, that they could come to. And if you have too infrequent, I think you lose the opportunity to be that reception point for folks to be engaged. So right, I think the existing work plan items of the community capacity, the youth advisory, sheriff oversight is kind of like three big pieces that we've been holding, plus receiving things that come from community as additional, so that we can either take action on them or refer them to the appropriate place and to be heard, included in the space with that Crawford is the person who would come to us. So that's my input on, and I don't know what others feel in terms of, specifically to Kiki's point, what are we trying to achieve? What's our goal in this in terms of, does it make sense to meet less frequently and relative to what we're trying to achieve? Well, maybe to just put more of a fine point on it, I'm proposing that we meet every other month as a subcommittee moving forward. And the important context, I think, is to say, I'm intending on not reapplying for the next term and completing this current term. So to have credibility in these spaces and these conversations, I think it's important to be saying, well, are you going to be showing up during these times and meeting however often it is? So right before I'm going to be giving my input on what should happen moving forward, I have had conversations internally with the coalition because I'm sitting as a steering committee member of the Racial Justice Coalition about who might step in for, who might apply to be a representative. I'm suggesting that there be this change in procedure or frequency based on my history of work with the group, but also transparency that I'm not intending on being part of the commitment every frequency of the meeting. So I think that it's also important to include that as context as I'm making this proposal or considering it, suggesting it to the group in terms of what everyone else feels is appropriate. Too much said. How do people feel about every other month? Thanks, Renee. Yeah, seeing indications that this makes sense.
Jeff, just like with the other committees, I think the frequency should be determined by what's at stake. I think that personally, every other month or even once a quarter is fine, except for the fact that sometimes you have things that need to be met on more frequently than once every other month. This is the community engagement. And one of the criticisms is that, the community doesn't know, or the community has not been engaged, the community, doesn't have information. So I think it's a little bit different than the data subcommittee or the diversion subcommittee, right? I think that the frequency of a community engagement subcommittee is more frequent because it needs to be finding ways to bring the community into the fold of the conversation. So I think it's a different conversation than a data subcommittee or a diversion one, because you need to be taking the information from the other subcommittees and figuring out how to pull in community. Maybe there's not every month, I don't know, but it depends on what's happening at the time. So I don't know if that can be predetermined as to say, oh, it's only once a quarter, because we don't know what we don't know. So there's it.
Thanks, Cheryl. I appreciate your perspective on that. And Renelle, I see your hand.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know if everybody remember. I think we got ripped last time up in here. Everybody was like, hey, you know what y'all doing? This and that and the other. And so that's, man, it just seems like we got to do something to increase, right, the productivity somehow, some way. But I don't have no problem running my engine a little extra too, because I feel obligated, right, to produce. We all in here working and trying to figure things out, but folks are looking to us, right? They looking to us. I think Kiki said it too. What's our real motive here as far as what's our priority, right? What's an important item? What are we focused on? Are we focused on our focus? So all that matters. All that matters. And what it means is, like Cheryl said too, in between or whatever, in all other committees that we're on, we all, I'm sure, have other obligations, but you find ways to produce something even in the background or when it's not a meeting time. So as we meet offline, then whatever jumps off, I mean, that might even need to be, distributed to folks, on an off time, when we're not meeting, so that folks will be informed about what's taking place or whatever it may be. I'm really just talking about formats or formalities or, ways to do things, but ultimately it has to, get to a bottom line for all of us. We really want to, I know we all want to produce something. So that's kind of like what I'm talking about, just putting the irons in the fire and coming up with something that's important that I know the public is looking for.
Thanks, Renell. I'm hearing from you and Cheryl, urgency, right? Community wants to see urgency. We want to feel urgency in what we're doing and make sure that we're acting as productively, as efficiently as possible, because we see how serious these problems are. Chris.
Thanks. I think the points are well taken, that I've heard over the last few minutes. I would mainly want to point out in terms of frequency or being responsive to emerging events that you would still have the opportunity, just like you have now, to call a special meeting. I will also point out to you that we tried to do that because we needed to be able to respond to all of the public comment that we got last time, and that just didn't come together in terms of folks and their availability, right? But that's an option that you have. So it's not necessarily that, again, if we're meeting on a monthly basis and we're kind of saying the same things or not seeing as much move, because I can tell you, a lot of you, especially, when I think of like Cheryl's at every meeting, right? And, for those of us who are, staffing these meetings in some way, like in terms of trying to develop the next thing or get ready for the next agenda, it comes around really fast, right? When it's a month, like you think, oh yeah, I have some time to get that done. It's like, if you haven't reached out to that person by the end of that week that you said you would, it's probably not gonna come together, right? So that's where I'm saying, if we don't have this space, but one or two people can agree to do some either some workshopping in a separate space, or that back and forth emailing about the things that we're supposed to be working on, so that we actually all have something that's worth our time to consider when we come back. That could be great. We could, if I think it's worth, to Ronell's point, shaking something up in terms of productivity and making sure that we move forward. If not, I don't know, we could try more. I'm forgetting the name of what I want. We could try more Jamboards, right? So that we're using a collaborative tool. We just need people to actually populate those, right? We need you to actually contribute to those. And I don't know that this format is necessarily the best format for that. I'm not trying to knock anyone in this space, right, who's been here consistently, but it's just that we don't always get that much, in terms of development and creation. Yeah, we may get some wordsmith here and there. Sometimes, when we sit with a screen that somebody's typing on after a while. But in terms of, really building or developing that thing that moves us forward, or really sort of hashing out some of the details that need to go into whatever we're proposing, that does not happen currently, to my eye, as much in these meetings as it probably needs to, for us to be as productive as we want to be and could be. And so just trying to think of, additional ways that we could be productive. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that each subcommittee meets once every other month, and then in between we take that extra time and meet, as a smaller group, or do. So it could look like just shifting the culture to developing more working meetings in some way. I just think we have a good enough sample size of what productivity in meetings like this that tend to be based around report outs, and where I think a lot of us tend to anticipate and expect report outs. I'm going to kind of sit and I'm going to listen to you tell me what you've done since then. And if I think there's a change or a thought that I can add, then I'll do that. And if not, then I'll just hear it. I just don't think that's getting us where we want to be. And I think it's something that's worth thinking about. I'm going to repeat because I'm talking too much now. The earlier point was, even if we did switch to every other month or something, less frequent, you would still have the opportunity, right? If there was something in particular that you needed to be responsive to or wanted to be responsive to more quickly than whatever frequency was decided from here, you'd have the opportunity to call a special meeting, right? So that everyone can get together about that thing that happened last week that we need to talk about, or that thing that happened at, whatever board or other public meeting that we all want to discuss. So just make sure that we all know whatever changes may be decided here in schedule, they wouldn't preclude you from being able to meet in a responsive way to something that occurred.
Thanks, Chris. Patrice, I see your hand.
Yeah, a couple other suggestions or things to consider. One is given the weightiness of particularly the building out the community capacity fund and the youth advisory council, you may want to consider, this subcommittee might want to consider recruiting other members of RJOB to join this group in order to increase participation and feedback. That might be an option for you. And also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, if you decide to form an ad hoc sort of work group, it does not have to necessarily be limited to the members of this subcommittee, but it can very well be one that is a work group of the full body. And in that case, you can just have a mixture of members there, just as long as you don't have too many members from the same subcommittee to where it ends up being a subcommittee meeting, to my understanding. That may be a possibility. You don't quote me on that totally, I'm recorded on it. And then the other piece too is, to be quite frank, the discussion around the sheriff oversight really took a lot of the attention of this subcommittee for the last several months, which then meant that not as much involvement has been there for some of the other agenda items. So I don't know, I can't recall what was the work plan sort of process here for this subcommittee. But it is always typically helpful when you are planning out specific action steps for certain work plan items, that you give yourself somewhat of a timeline or a time frame of accomplishing certain milestones. So that way, if the community is looking for, well, what else is there coming from this subcommittee, you can then share what those milestones that you've accomplished has been so far. I think it's a great idea that this subcommittee has looked into other models for the community capacity fund. You just haven't quite yet narrowed down where you want your focus to be. And so I think those sort of unanswered questions really require sufficient time to talk through and to discuss. And like was stated earlier, my hope is that for a lot of the folks who attended or attempted to attend last month's CEF meeting, that their energy will be there, not only just on the sheriff oversight item, but on all of the community engagement and funding related items, because their feedback is so critical and necessary for though you guys' agenda items, as well as the full scale of the 17 recommendations that the full body is to steer. So just to kind of put a bit of a frame on this as to how you may want to consider leveraging the support that may very well be there from the full body membership, as well as the community members that attended last time that were particularly interested in this agenda item of the sheriff oversight, that you could utilize their expertise, or at least their feedback for some of these other items as well.
Thanks, Patrice. I think your comments and others before you were really helpful for us to inform how we move forward with this. Kind of putting these different pieces together, remembering again what Renelle, you were saying, and Cheryl, you were saying that maybe if we were to, as individuals, be able to commit to the current times that we've already carved out of the monthly Thursday afternoon, and make, if this subcommittee were to meet every other month, but we were to keep the time that we have already devoted to our individual spaces. So if the Racial Justice Coalition had a basically not listening, but planning or informing session of what we do here, and Office of Ed and Health Right 360 and probation, basically informing of what we do, because I think that's also one of the regular responses that I've heard in criticism, valid criticism, is like, I never heard about this thing, what you guys are doing. I didn't even know that you met or wherever it was. And we'll say, you know, it was on this one link of the thing that was there, but that's, it's less clear access than perhaps if I were to have a monthly standing or every other month standing meeting with the coalition to say, this is the opportunity for you to be chiming in about giving input to what happens at our community engagement and funding group. So it maintains that outreach, exposure, opportunity for input, and not like you guys dialed it back because this wasn't important. We're just changing the way that we're doing it so that we're more effective and moving forward with it. It's kind of where I'm thinking. And I don't think we're going to have a final decision on this one today. We're at 4:30, which I would believe leads us to meeting next month as currently scheduled, and we'll go from there. But this will definitely inform what we do and what decision we may make. So perhaps this will be on the agenda next time, the decision that we would have about frequency of meetings, as well as our other items. Not hit today, in particular the Youth Advisory Council. Given that we're at time, I am inclined to say thanks everyone and appreciate everyone's effort and energy and continued attention, and onward. Meeting adjourned. Bye-bye, y'all.
Thanks.